The text message was short, brutal, and sent while I was at work. "Jessica, you need to find somewhere else to live by the end of the month. Ashley needs more space for her art studio. This isn't up for discussion. Love, Mom." I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. 22 years of calling that house home. And I was being evicted via text message to make room for my 19-year-old stepsister's hobby. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of my cubicle seemed to flicker as I stared at my phone screen. Round me, the usual hum of keyboards and muted conversations felt distant, like I was underwater. My chest tightened with that familiar feeling of being dismissed. But this time, it cut deeper than ever before. This wasn't about forgetting to include me in dinner plans or choosing Ashley's preferences over mine. This was about the roof over my head, the bedroom where I'd grown up, the space that held every memory of who I used to be. I set my phone down carefully, as if it might explode if I moved too quickly. My colleague Marcus glanced over from the next desk, probably noticing my sudden stillness. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in a tech startup office, working on software that would eventually make me wealthy while being told I was homeless. The disconnect between my professional success and my family's perception of my worth felt like a canyon opening beneath my feet. That house on Maple Street in Riverside had been my sanctuary for as long as I could remember. Dad had bought it when I was 3, before the divorce, before Mom met Robert, before everything changed. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a small backyard where Mom used to grow tomatoes. My bedroom faced east, catching the morning sun that would wake me gently each day. I'd painted those walls myself when I turned 16. A soft lavender that Mom said was too mature for my age, but allowed anyway. When Robert moved in 3 years ago with his daughter Ashley, the house dynamics shifted dramatically. Suddenly, my quiet mornings were interrupted by Ashley's music blasting from the room next door. My study sessions were constantly broken by her dramatic phone calls with friends. But I adapted because that's what you do for family, right? I told myself it was temporary growing pains that we'd find our rhythm. Ashley had always been Robert's princess, and Robert had quickly become Mom's everything. He swept into our lives with his successful contracting business. His confident laugh and his ability to fix everything Mom had been struggling with since the divorce. He painted the house, updated the kitchen, and somehow made Mom smile more than I'd seen in years. I should have been grateful, and part of me was. But watching him take over the space that had been ours, watching Mom defer to his opinions about everything from dinner choices to household rules, left me feeling like a guest in my own home. The favoritism started small. Ashley needed the better Wi-Fi connection for her online classes, so my setup was moved to the basement. Ashley was sensitive to morning noise, so I had to tiptoe around during my early workout routine. Ashley's art supplies required better storage, so my childhood keepsakes were boxed up and moved to the garage. Each concession felt reasonable. In isolation, but together they painted a clear picture of whose comfort mattered most. I'd been contributing to household expenses since I started working part-time in high school. That continued through college. Even now, with my entry-level software developer salary, I handed over $400 monthly for rent and utilities. It wasn't much by California standards, but it was my contribution to keeping the family afloat. Ashley, meanwhile, worked occasionally at a local coffee shop but spent most of her earnings on art supplies and clothes. Her financial contribution to the household was essentially zero, but somehow her needs always took priority. The pattern became impossible to ignore during family dinners. Robert would ask about Ashley's day with genuine interest, encouraging her artistic pursuits and praising even her smallest accomplishments. When the conversation turned to me, the questions were perfunctory. "How's work?" "That's nice, dear." "Pass the potatoes." My achievements at the tech company, my increasing responsibilities, my growing expertise in software development that was already catching attention from senior developers, all of it seemed to register as background noise. Mom's transformation was perhaps the most painful part. The woman who used to help me with science fair projects and celebrated every small victory was now primarily focused on maintaining harmony with Robert. She developed a habit of preemptively shutting down any conversation that might create tension, which usually meant my concerns were dismissed before they could be fully expressed. When I tried to talk about feeling overlooked, she'd smile that tight smile and suggest I was being too sensitive. That blended families required patience and understanding. Robert's attitude toward me was politely dismissive. Directly disrespectful, but his body language spoke volumes. During family discussions, he'd make eye contact with Mom and Ashley, but look past me as if I weren't there. He'd ask Ashley about her friends, her interests, her plans. But his interactions with me rarely went beyond basic pleasantries. I was furniture in his redecorated life. Staring at that text message, everything crystallized. I wasn't being asked to sacrifice for the family good. I was being removed because I was inconvenient. Ashley's art studio wasn't an emergency need. It was a want, and my displacement was the easiest solution. The casual cruelty of handling it via text, the assumption that I'd simply comply without question, the complete absence of concern for where I'd go or how I'd manage, told me everything I needed to know about my place in this new family structure. I left work early that day, something I'd never done before. The drive home to Riverside felt longer than usual. Every familiar landmark. Carrying new weight? The coffee shop where Ashley worked part-time looked different somehow, as did the gas station where I'd pumped fuel countless times while running errands for the family. Everything felt like I was seeing it through the lens of someone who no longer belonged. Walking through the front door of the house felt surreal. The living room looked exactly the same, with Robert's oversized leather recliner dominating the space and Mom's collection of succulents lining the windowsill. Ashley's art supplies were scattered across the dining room table. Paint tubes and brushes claiming territory that used to be shared space. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. The familiar sound of Mom and Robert discussing dinner plans while Ashley's laughter punctuated their conversation. They didn't notice me at first. I stood in the doorway watching this scene of domestic contentment, realizing I was observing it from the outside. When Mom finally spotted me, her expression shifted to something between guilt and annoyance, as if my presence was an unwelcome reminder of an unpleasant task she'd rather avoid. "Oh, Jessica, you're home early," she said, her voice artificially bright. "We were just talking about paint colors for Ashley's new space." New space? My space. It's a room where I'd spent countless hours studying for my computer science degree, where I'd video called with study groups, where I'd celebrated getting my first job offer. They were already discussing paint colors as if I'd never existed there. Ashley bounced over with characteristic enthusiasm, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Jess, isn't this exciting? I'm thinking of a soft sage green for the walls, maybe. With some white trim, it'll be perfect for natural lighting when I'm working on my paintings." The casual assumption that my displacement was cause for celebration hit me like cold water. There was no acknowledgement that this change affected me, no recognition that I might have feelings about losing my home. I was simply an obstacle being cleared away so real life could continue. Robert emerged from the kitchen carrying a beer, his expression neutral but watchful. "Jessica, your mother explained the situation. We figured you'd understand, being out of college now and working. It's time to spread your wings, right?" The phrase "spread your wings" was particularly insulting, as if being forced out was some kind of gift rather than abandonment. I looked around the room at these three people who were supposed to be my family, searching for any sign of conflict or sadness about the decision. Instead, I saw relief. They were relieved that the problem of what to do with me had been solved. So neatly. "Where exactly am I supposed to spread these wings?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Apartments in this area started $1,800 a month for anything decent. On my salary, that's going to be tight. Mom's face flickered with something that might have been concern, but Robert jumped in before she could respond.
There
"Are plenty of affordable options if you look in the right places. Maybe something closer to your work would make more sense anyway. Shorten that commute." He was right about the commute, but wrong about everything else. Moving closer to my office in Irvine would mean even higher rent prices. And affordable options in Orange County usually meant sharing a cramped apartment with strangers or living in neighborhoods where my car might not survive the night. hurt most was the complete absence of discussion about alternatives. No one had suggested converting the garage or basement into Ashley's studio. No one had mentioned that Ashley could wait another year or two when I might naturally move out on my own timeline. No one had even asked if I might want to stay and help with increased expenses. The decision had been made around me, about me. Without me, found myself thinking about all the ways I'd contributed to this household over the years, contributions that apparently counted for nothing now. Beyond the monthly rent money, I'd been the family's unofficial tech support for years. Every time Mom's computer acted up, every time Robert needed help with his business spreadsheets, every time Ashley couldn't figure out why her printer wasn't working, they called me. I'd spent countless weekends troubleshooting, updating, and maintaining the technology that kept their lives running smoothly. During college, I'd commuted from home to save money, contributing those savings to household expenses when things got tight. When Robert's contracting business hit a slow patch 2 winters ago, my rent money helped cover the mortgage payment. When Ashley needed a laptop for school, I'd researched options, found the best deals, and helped set up all her accounts and software. I'd been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never caused drama or demanded attention. More than financial contributions, I'd been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and adapted to everyone else's needs. When Ashley went through her dramatic breakup phase last year, I'd been the one listening to her cry at 2 a.m, offering tissues and advice, while sacrificing my own sleep before important work presentations. When Mom and Robert had their occasional arguments about finances or parenting styles, I'd been the neutral party who helped them find common ground. I'd organized family birthday parties, remembered important dates, coordinated holiday plans, and maintained relationships with extended family members who Robert had never bothered to meet. Last Christmas, I'd spent my entire bonus on gifts for everyone, making sure Ashley got the expensive art supplies she'd been wanting and that Mom got the spa day she'd mentioned needing. Standing in that living room surrounded by people planning my replacement, I realized that all of those contributions had been invisible to them, or worse, they'd been expected. Taken for granted as the price of my continued residence rather than valued as the acts of love and commitment they'd been meant to represent. The most crushing realization was that they genuinely didn't see anything wrong with their approach. In their minds, this was a reasonable business transaction. Jessica had served her purpose. Now it was time for her to move along so Ashley could have what she needed: the years of shared meals, family vacations, holiday traditions, and daily life meant nothing compared to Ashley's immediate desire for creative space. That night, I lay in my soon-to-be-former bedroom, staring at the ceiling I'd looked at for nearly 2 decades. Tomorrow, I'd need to start apartment hunting, packing, and figuring out how to rebuild my life around this sudden upheaval. But tonight, I was just grieving the family I'd thought I had and the home I'd believed was permanently mine. The apartment hunting began immediately, and the reality of Southern California housing prices hit me like a physical blow. Every listing I could afford was either a studio apartment the size of my current closet or located in areas where the commute to work would eat up any savings in rent. The decent places required first month, last month, and security deposit up front, totaling nearly $6,000 that I simply didn't have sitting in my checking account. I'd been responsible with money, but living at home had allowed me to be generous with family expenses rather than building a massive emergency fund. Every time I'd managed to save a decent amount, something would come up. Last year it was helping Mom cover the cost of new tires for her car when hers blew out unexpectedly. The year before, I'd contributed to Ashley's community college tuition when Robert's business hit a seasonal lull. 6 months ago, I'd paid for the family's vacation to San Diego when Mom mentioned how stressed she'd been and how much a getaway would help everyone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Each time, I'd told myself these were investments in family harmony, ways to show that I valued our relationship beyond just paying rent. Now I realized they'd been viewed as expected contributions, not generous gestures. The money I'd given freely, thinking it built connection and demonstrated my commitment to the family. It had actually been seen as evidence that I had disposable income and therefore didn't need as much consideration. The pattern became clearer as I reflected on years of similar situations. When Ashley needed a car for her part-time job, the family had lengthy discussions about budget and options. When I'd needed reliable transportation for my internship, I'd been expected to figure it out myself. I'd bought a used Honda with my own savings, while Ashley received a newer Toyota that Robert co-signed for, with payments structured around her regular coffee shop income. Family vacations told the same story. Ashley's preferences drove destination choices, meal selections, and activity planning. Her fear of heights meant we avoided mountain destinations. Her vegetarian phase meant restaurants were chosen around her dietary restrictions. Her love of shopping meant every trip included extended mall visits that bored everyone else. When I'd suggested alternatives that might suit the broader family's interests, I was told to be more flexible and understanding of Ashley's needs. Holiday celebrations revealed the disparity most starkly. Ashley's birthday was a major production, involving themed decorations, elaborate dinners, and carefully coordinated gifts that Robert and Mom shopped for together weeks in advance. They'd spend hours discussing what would make her feel special, what experiences she'd enjoy, what material items would bring her joy. My birthday was acknowledged with a generic card and dinner at whatever restaurant wasn't too crowded. Christmas morning epitomized the difference. Ashley's gifts filled a substantial portion of the space under the tree, carefully wrapped in coordinated paper that Mom selected specifically for her. Art supplies, clothes, jewelry, electronics, experiences like concert tickets or art classes. My gifts were practical, thoughtful in a utilitarian way, but clearly chosen with less time and emotional investment. A sweater for work, a gift card to a restaurant, maybe a book related to my field. The financial dynamics were perhaps most telling. Ashley's expenses were treated as family expenses. Her art supplies appeared on the household budget. Gas. Money came from petty cash. Her car insurance was bundled with the family plan. When she needed dental work, it was discussed as a family healthcare expense. My expenses, meanwhile, were entirely my responsibility. When I'd needed my wisdom teeth removed during college, I'd worked out a payment plan with the oral surgeon myself. When my laptop died during my senior year, I'd borrowed money from my study group friend Marcus and paid him back over 6 months. Even my professional achievements were filtered through how they benefited others. When I'd received my first promotion at the tech company, Mom's immediate response was to wonder if this meant I could contribute more to household expenses. When I'd been selected for a specialized training program that required weekend workshops, Robert had complained about how my absence would affect my household responsibilities. The pride they should have felt in my accomplishments was consistently overshadowed by calculations about what my success meant for them. Ashley's future was discussed with excitement and possibility. Her art career was treated as a legitimate path worthy of investment and support. The family regularly brainstormed ways to help her network, find opportunities, and develop her talent. They'd even considered converting the garage into a permanent studio before deciding my bedroom was a better option. My career in technology, despite being more financially stable and traditionally successful, was treated as a practical necessity rather than something to celebrate or nurture. The social dynamics were equally revealing. Ashley's friends were welcomed into the house with enthusiasm. Mom would prepare snacks for their visits and Robert would engage them in friendly conversation about school and their interests. My friends, the few times I'd brought them around, were politely tolerated but never actively embraced. Marcus had once mentioned feeling like he was intruding when he'd stopped by to work on a project together. Despite my repeated invitations, extended family interactions told the same story. At gatherings with Mom's relatives, Ashley was introduced with detailed descriptions of her artistic talents and future plans. I was introduced as working in computers, a description that usually ended conversation rather than starting it. Robert's family, whom we saw less frequently, knew Ashley's interests and aspirations, but seemed unclear about what I actually did for work beyond something technical. The breaking point wasn't the text message itself, though that was certainly brutal enough. The breaking point was the realization that this eviction was the logical conclusion of years of systematic devaluation. I hadn't been building family relationships through my contributions and accommodations. I'd been enabling a dynamic where my needs, feelings, and future were consistently treated as secondary considerations. Sitting in my bedroom that would soon belong to Ashley, surrounded by belongings I'd need to pack and memories I'd need to leave behind, I understood that this wasn't about space or money or family harmony. This was about hierarchy. And I had never been included in the inner circle of people whose comfort and happiness mattered most. The most painful part was recognizing how long I'd participated in my own marginalization, mistaking their willingness to accept my sacrifices for appreciation of my value. I'd been the family's reliable resource, not their cherished member. The apartment viewing appointments became exercises in humiliation. Each landlord took one look at my income statement and shook their head with barely concealed disappointment. $2,400 a month for a one-bedroom in Irvine was already stretching my budget dangerously thin. But even those units had waiting lists of applicants with higher salaries and better credit scores. The cheaper options were either 40-minute drives from work through notorious traffic corridors, were located in complexes where the online reviews mentioned break-ins and maintenance requests that went unanswered for months. At one particularly depressing viewing in Garden Grove, the apartment manager, a tired-looking woman named Patricia, actually laughed when I explained my timeline. "Honey, you need to find somewhere else by the end of the month. Good luck with that. Most places have 30-day application processes, and that's if you get approved." She gestured around the cramped studio with its stained carpet and single window facing a brick wall. "This place has 6 applications already, and 2 of them are offering above asking rent." The financial pressure was mounting daily. Every evening, I'd return to my temporary sanctuary on Maple Street to find Ashley measuring walls and making excited phone calls about paint samples and furniture arrangements. She'd transformed my displacement into her personal interior design project, complete with Pinterest boards and color schemes. Meanwhile, I was calculating how many meals I could skip to afford application fees and deposits. The real revelation came during what I now think of as the dinner table incident. It was a Thursday evening, and I'd just returned from another fruitless apartment hunt. My feet ached from walking through complex after complex, my head pounded from stress, and my bank account looked increasingly desperate. I'd found one possibility, a basement studio in Costa Mesa that smelled like mold, but fell within my budget range, and I was trying to convince myself it could work temporarily. I entered the dining room to find the family gathered around takeout containers from Ashley's favorite Thai restaurant, the expensive place downtown that charged $18 for pad Thai. No one had called to ask if I wanted anything, despite knowing I'd be home for dinner. This wasn't unusual. Something about seeing them enjoying this feast while I faced the prospect of eating cereal for the 3rd night. Running because I was hoarding money for deposits struck me differently. "How'd the apartment hunting go?" Mom asked absently while serving Ashley a generous portion of green curry. I explained the day's failures, the impossible prices, the competitive market, the timeline pressure they'd created. As I spoke, I watched their faces carefully, looking for some sign of concern or regret about the situation they'd put me in. Instead, I saw polite attention mixed with mild irritation, as if my housing crisis was an inconvenient conversation. Topic during their relaxing family dinner. "Well, you'll figure something out," Robert said with casual confidence. "Young people are resourceful. Maybe look into roommate situations or those extended stay hotels until something opens up." Extended stay hotels. He was genuinely suggesting I live in a motel because finding actual housing in the time frame they'd given me was proving impossible. Ashley nodded enthusiastically, as if this was brilliant advice rather than a suggestion that I embrace homelessness. As a lifestyle choice? Actually, Ashley chimed in, clearly excited to share an idea she'd been developing. "I was thinking we could have a little goodbye party for you this weekend. Like a going-away celebration? I could make those cookies you like, and we could invite some people over. A goodbye party." She wanted to throw a party to celebrate my eviction, complete with cookies and guests who would witness my failure to launch properly into independent adulthood. The disconnect between her enthusiasm and my reality was so profound that I actually laughed, a sharp sound that made everyone look at me strangely. "That's very thoughtful, Ashley, but I think I'll pass on celebrating being made homeless." The word homeless seemed to hit the room like a slap. Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Robert's expression shifted to something more serious. Ashley looked genuinely confused, as if the connection between losing my housing and being homeless hadn't occurred to her. "You're not homeless," Mom said quickly, that defensive tone creeping into her voice. "You're just transitioning to independent living. It's completely normal for people your age. Independent living typically involves choice and planning." I replied. "This is eviction with a 30-day notice via text message." Robert set down his beer with deliberate care. "Now that's not fair, Jessica. We gave you notice, which is more than most landlords are required to do month to month. And this isn't arbitrary. Ashley needs space for her creative development. And you're at a stage in life where moving out makes sense anyway." The phrase creative development applied to Ashley's hobby painting, while my actual career development was treated as irrelevant, perfectly encapsulated their priorities. But what struck me most was Robert's casual reference to most landlords. And month-to-month arrangements? I wasn't their daughter making a natural transition to independence. I was a tenant being cleared out for a more desirable renter. "You're right," I said quietly. "You're absolutely right about landlord obligations." Something in my tone must have registered as concerning, because Mom jumped in quickly with soothing platitudes about how this would be good for me in the long run, how I'd appreciate having my own space, how this was really an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. The words washed over me without impact, because I was busy processing a fundamental shift in perspective. I'd been thinking about this situation as a family crisis, approaching it with emotional appeals and expectations of consideration. But Robert had just clarified the actual framework. This was a business transaction between landlords and a tenant, and the tenant had become inconvenient to their plans. That night, I sat at my computer, ostensibly searching rental listings, but actually thinking about frameworks and power dynamics. At work, I'd been learning about system architecture, about how networks function, and how to identify points of leverage within complex structures. I'd been approaching my family situation with the wrong mental model entirely. My phone buzzed. With a text from Marcus, my colleague, who'd become a genuine friend over the past year. "How's the apartment hunt going? Still can't believe they're kicking you out for art supplies." I'd confided in Marcus about the situation, and his response had been immediate outrage, followed by practical offers of help. He'd suggested I could crash on his couch temporarily, helped me research neighborhood options, and even offered to co-sign a lease if that would help with applications. The contrast between his immediate concern for my welfare and my family's casual dismissal of my housing crisis was stark. Marcus worked in a different department at our company, but we'd collaborated on several projects and developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests. He'd mentioned multiple times that my coding skills were being underutilized in my current role, that I should be looking at senior developer positions or even considering freelance consulting work that could significantly boost my income. 4. The first time since receiving that text message, I started thinking about possibilities rather than just problems. I pulled up salary comparison websites, researched freelance rates for software developers with my skill set, and began calculating what my earning potential could be if I approached my career with the same strategic focus I brought to my work. Projects. The family saw me as a tenant who'd outlived her usefulness. Fine. Time to start thinking like the professional I'd become rather than the grateful daughter I'd been trying to be. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Faster than anyone expected. Marcus had been right about my skills being underutilized. Within 2 months of moving into that moldy basement studio in Costa Mesa, I'd started taking freelance projects that paid more in a weekend than my full-time job paid in 2 weeks. By month 4, I'd quit my corporate position and launched my own software consulting firm. The key was shifting my mindset from grateful employee to strategic entrepreneur. I specialized in helping small businesses optimize their digital infrastructure, something I'd been doing informally for years without recognizing its value. My first major client was a chain of yoga studios whose outdated booking system was costing them thousands in lost revenue. I rebuilt their entire digital framework in 3 weeks and charged $15,000 for work that would have cost them $60,000 through a traditional agency. Word spread quickly in Orange County's tight-knit business community. My combination of technical expertise and ability to translate complex solutions into practical language made me invaluable to entrepreneurs who needed results, not jargon. Within 8 months, I had a waiting list of clients and had moved into a proper office space in Newport Beach. By the end of my first year as an independent consultant, I was earning more than Robert made with his contracting business. By the end of year 2, I'd purchased the penthouse apartment in Marina del Rey that had seemed impossible when I was apartment hunting in desperation. The floor 2-ceiling windows overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and the monthly payment was more than most people's annual salaries, but I could afford it comfortably. I'd thought about my family often during this period, but not with the painful longing I'd expected. Distance had provided clarity about the dynamics I'd escaped. The occasional updates through mutual acquaintances painted a predictable picture. Ashley had lost interest in art after 6 months and was now pursuing photography, requiring different equipment and lighting setups. Robert's business was struggling with increased competition. Mom was working part-time at a dental office too, help with expenses. The confrontation came at a coffee shop in Riverside, of all places. I'd been visiting a client nearby and stopped for caffeine before the drive. Back to Marina del Rey, I was dressed professionally, carrying the leather portfolio that had become my trademark, when I heard someone call my name. Mom looked older, more tired than I remembered. She approached hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Jessica, I almost didn't recognize you. You look so successful," I suggested. She nodded, then immediately seemed to regret the admission. "We've been wondering how you're doing. Ashley asks about you sometimes." The conversation was stilted, full of careful politeness and unspoken tension. She asked about my work, and I explained briefly that I ran my own consulting firm. She asked where I was living, and I mentioned Marina del Rey without elaborating. "Marina del Rey," she repeated, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "That's quite expensive. It's manageable." When we parted ways, she asked for my address, claiming she wanted to send a Christmas card. I wrote it on the back of my business card. Watching her expression change as she read the prestigious building name and penthouse unit number. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my door unannounced. The doorman had called up to announce a visitor, and I'd been expecting a client. Not. My mother standing in my marble-floored foyer, staring at the panoramic ocean view and custom furnishings that probably cost more than her annual salary. She walked through my space in silence, taking in the smart home technology, the artwork I'd commissioned from local artists, the kitchen that was larger than her entire living room. When she reached the master bedroom with its private balcony overlooking the yacht harbor, she stopped. "How much does this place cost?" she whispered. "Why do you ask?" She turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, because I need to understand what we lost when we lost you. The admission hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of everything that couldn't be undone. She'd come expecting to find me struggling, perhaps hoping to offer help that would restore her position as the needed parent. Instead, she discovered that removing me from their lives had freed me to build something extraordinary. "We made a mistake," she continued, her voice barely audible. "Ashley dropped out of community college last month. Robert's business is failing. We're going to lose the house." I listened without responding, watching her process the reality that her strategic decisions had backfired completely. The daughter she'd dismissed as expendable had become the success story she'd never imagined possible. Would you consider helping us? Maybe alone, just until things stabilize?" The request was breathtaking in its assumption that blood ties created permanent obligation, regardless of how those ties had been severed. She stood in my penthouse, surrounded by evidence of what I'd accomplished without them, asking me to rescue the family that had cast me aside. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, "but I don't think that would be appropriate." She left without argument, understanding finally that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt with wishful thinking and desperate need. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.